Daniel wasn't supposed to be home until Friday. He'd told his wife, Sophie, 3 separate times that his flight didn't land until the weekend. So when he walked through his own front door on a Tuesday afternoon, nobody in that house expected him. And what he heard before anyone noticed him standing there changed everything about how he saw his own mother. Daniel Reyes had spent 11 years building a small construction consulting firm, the kind of business that eats your weekends and doesn't apologize for it. He traveled constantly, Denver one week, Phoenix the next, and most of the time, it was fine. Sophie understood the schedule when she married him. She just never expected to be 7 months pregnant, and mostly alone for it. They lived in Daniel's childhood home, a decision that made sense on paper. His mother, Carmen, had lived there alone since his father passed 3 years earlier, and when Daniel and Sophie got married, moving in together, the 3 of them, seemed like it would help everyone. Carmen wouldn't be lonely, Sophie wouldn't be alone while Daniel traveled. It sounded good in theory. In practice, it hadn't been easy. Carmen had strong opinions about almost everything: how the kitchen should be organized, what a real home-cooked meal looked like, and increasingly, how a pregnant woman should behave. Sophie tried. She really did. She bit her tongue when Carmen commented on her weight gain for the baby's sake. She smiled through the backhanded remarks about how her generation didn't know how to cook properly. She told herself it would get better once the baby came. What Sophie hadn't told Daniel, because she didn't want to start a war between him and his mother, was that the comments had gotten sharper over the last few weeks. Carmen had started saying things when Daniel wasn't around, small things at first. Then, not so small. Sophie hadn't grown up with money. Her father worked in a warehouse for 30 years. Her mother cleaned houses on weekends to help cover bills. She'd met Daniel while working as a receptionist at a dental office, and even now, 5 years into their marriage, Carmen occasionally reminded her, gently, cruelly, always with a smile, that she'd married up. Daniel didn't know any of this. He was 3 states away, closing a contract that would fund the nursery renovation he'd promised Sophie before the baby arrived. He thought things at home were peaceful. He had no idea his wife had started eating dinner in their bedroom most nights, just to avoid being alone at the table with his mother. The Tuesday, everything changed, started like any other for Sophie. She was folding tiny onesies on the living room couch when Carmen walked in from the kitchen, arms crossed, that particular look on her face Sophie had learned to dread. "I found your doctor's bill on the counter," Carmen said. "Do you have any idea how much money you 2 are spending on that OB? Daniel works himself into the ground, and you're out here racking up bills like it's nothing." "Carmen, insurance covers most of it," Sophie said quietly, still folding. "It's just the deductible." "It's always something with you." Carmen's voice climbed. "You know, when I was pregnant with Daniel, I worked until the week I gave birth. I didn't lie around all day letting my husband pay for everything." Sophie set the onesie down. Her hands were shaking slightly, though she tried to hide it. "I'm not lying around, Carmen. My doctor told me to reduce my hours because of my blood pressure. You know that." "Convenient." Carmen let out a short, sharp laugh. "You know, I've been wondering something for a while now. Are you even sure this baby is Daniel's? Because the way you 2 rushed into things—" "That's enough." Sophie's voice cracked, more from shock than anger. "You don't get to say that to me." "I get to say whatever I want in my own house," Carmen snapped, stepping closer, her voice rising to something almost unrecognizable. "You showed up out of nowhere, got my son to marry you in 8 months, and now you expect to be waited on. Some women will do anything to trap a man with money, and I watched you do it in real time." Sophie stood frozen, one hand instinctively moving to her stomach, tears already sliding down her face before she could stop them. She opened her mouth to respond, and that was the exact moment the front door opened. Neither woman heard it at first. Carmen was too deep into her tirade, and Sophie was too focused on holding herself together to notice the sound of a suitcase being set down in the hallway. "And frankly, I don't know what my son sees in someone who can't even—" "Mom." Carmen spun around. Daniel stood in the doorway to the living room, still in his travel clothes, his face unreadable in a way Sophie had never seen before. He hadn't planned to surprise them. His afternoon meeting had been canceled, and he'd caught an earlier flight, thinking he'd surprise Sophie with 2 extra days together before the baby came. Instead, he'd walked in on the last 30 seconds of a conversation he was never supposed to hear. "How long?" Daniel asked, his voice low and very controlled. "Has this been happening?" Carmen's face shifted instantly, the sharpness dissolving into something softer, more careful. "Daniel, honey, you don't understand. I heard what you said to her." He wasn't shouting. Somehow, that made it worse. "About the baby. About her trapping me. I heard all of it, Mom." Sophie was crying openly now, one hand still pressed against her stomach, the other gripping the back of the couch like she needed it to stay standing. Daniel crossed the room in 3 steps and put his arm around her, guiding her gently down to sit before he turned back to face his mother. "I need you to understand something," Daniel said. "Sophie didn't trap me into anything. I proposed to her in a parking lot outside a hospital the night her father had his first heart attack, because I realized in that moment I didn't want to spend one more day without her as my family. That was my decision, not hers." Carmen opened her mouth, but Daniel kept going, quiet and steady. "And this baby, my daughter, is not something you get to question. Not ever again." "I was only trying to help you see clearly," Carmen said, her voice thinner now. "I'm your mother. I'm allowed to worry. Worrying is asking if she's sleeping enough. Worrying is asking if the nursery's ready. What you just did wasn't worry, Mom. That was cruelty. And you did it because you thought no one was listening." The room was silent except for Sophie's quiet crying, slower now, more from relief than pain. "I think," Daniel said carefully, "you need some time somewhere else. My cousin has a spare room, and I think some distance will help all of us figure out what happens next. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing it because my wife needs to feel safe in her own home. And right now, she doesn't." Carmen didn't argue. Maybe she understood, somewhere underneath the wounded pride, that she'd finally gone too far to talk her way back from it. She left for her sister's place 2 days later, quietly, without another confrontation. That night, after Carmen was gone and the house was finally still, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed while Sophie leaned against him, her hand resting on the small, steady movement of the baby kicking beneath her palm. "I should have told you sooner," Sophie whispered, about the things she'd been saying. "I didn't want to make things worse between you two." "You don't ever have to protect me from the truth," Daniel said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Especially not when it's about protecting yourself." Sophie let out a small, tired laugh, wiping the last of her tears away. "I really thought I was overreacting, that maybe I was just being too sensitive because of the hormones." "You weren't overreacting," Daniel said firmly. "You were surviving something alone that you shouldn't have had to survive alone. That's over now." Outside, the evening had turned soft and quiet, streetlights flickering on one by one down the block. Inside, for the first time in weeks, Sophie finally let herself relax completely, not because everything was perfect, but because she finally felt, without a single doubt, that she wasn't facing any of it by herself anymore. If you believe every mother deserves to be protected, not questioned, subscribe to Woven Hearts for a new story every week.